Hello again, everyone, and thanks once again for joining us for Tuesday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm David Percy. Up first, we'll see the Southeast Alaska Weather Zone realignment that goes into effect on the 13th of September. Tomorrow, Wednesday, the 13th of September, and the Juneau Forecast Office, that's where the zone changes are occurring, and only for the public and fire weather zones, but not the marine zones. And again, using borough and census boundaries to help eliminate the overwarning problem of Weather Service alerts across Southeast Alaska. So again, please contact juneau.weather@noaa.gov for more detailed information, or if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. Again, this kicks into effect tomorrow, which time I could finally lay this graphic to rest. And from there are no watches, warnings, or advisories out around the state this afternoon. And for tonight, or at least for the moment anyway, that may change. It could change without warning or without notice. And so moving on to the satellite imagery, you can see low pressure sort of over Cook Inlet, actually, or the Kenai Peninsula there. And to the west, clouds are moving from generally northwest to south-southeast, and of course to the east side of that low center, south to north flow, and that's where all the moisture is. And you can see one big surge coming up across the North Gulf Coast into the Copper River Basins, with the clouds spilling into the eastern Tanana Valley. And not a bad day around Fairbanks earlier today. Had some sunshine around there. Otherwise, a fair amount of rain fell, moderate to heavy rain today along the eastern North Gulf Coast, with much lighter amounts into the northern Panhandle. Just mostly clouds, and another basically mostly sunny day down over the southern southeast coast. Temperatures into the 60s once again there. And windy conditions with light precipitation, mostly in the form of rain occurring, light rain occurring along the Arctic coast into the north slope. And a lot of loose, apparently disorganized clouds out over the western Bering Sea there. That with moisture with the system still back over the Russian Far East, and weak frontal boundaries there. And of course, that's going to change over the next, actually tonight, a stronger system will begin to move in, and then even a stronger system pulls in Thursday into the western Aleutians and southwest Bering. On the chart here, it does show up as a warm front in the clouds there, or on the surface map, with some precipitation, mostly north of the Aleutians and well west of the Pribilofs. Actually, some clearing between the Pribilofs and that precipitation shield with the warm front there. Otherwise, weak low over the southwest coast, finally drifting inland, slowly been moving eastward the last couple of days, now in over the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta area, keeping areas of precipitation on the light side there, maybe 1 to 2/10 of an inch. Some areas could have picked up 1/4 of an inch, other areas not seeing much at all, just a few hundredths, and then that even tapers off as you head north up to the Noatak Valley. There was some light precipitation along the north slope and Arctic coast there. And east winds, high pressure up over the Arctic, and then the lower pressure here over central southern Alaska, put the gradient right along the central and eastern Arctic coast. They're seeing winds gusting anywhere from 33 to 37 miles per hour throughout the day today. And again, some sunshine in over the eastern interior, Tanana Valley, Fairbanks area. Had very nice conditions earlier today with a fair amount of sunshine. Otherwise, the North Gulf Coast, up to over an inch of rain fell in the last 12 hours at Cordova and Yakutat, down to icy and dry bays. Lighter amounts, about 1/3 of an inch in Seward and Anchorage, and about 1/4 of an inch falling in Togiak. Those are one of the heavier amounts reported around the state today. But you can see high pressure keeping it dry over the southern 2/3 or 3/4 of this area there, with a fair amount of sunshine down to the south, mild temperatures once again. Not much change in that tonight. That weakening front having trouble pushing moisture into that ridge any farther to the south. It may work a little farther south, but rainfall rates will diminish over the eastern North Gulf Coast, and just some areas of light rain into the northern Panhandle. Could still see some moderate rain this evening around Yakutat, maybe possibly into Elfin Cove, but generally the whole system weakening, and still showers and areas of rain now over the eastern interior move in, replacing the nice day you had in the Fairbanks area and those areas today, mostly south of the Yukon River there, and scattered showers over south central Alaska, light rain and showers North Gulf Coast, Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay, and then low clouds, fog, drizzle, IFR with that warm front that's not all that strong, especially in its southeastern portion there, but enough to spread some moisture into the Alaska Peninsula, maybe on Alaska Island, not even reaching the Pribilofs tonight. But that low center deepening as it pulls into the Bering Sea down to 988 millibars. Otherwise, up along the north slope, areas of mixed precipitation will be quite light once again, as it has been, with areas of fog, low clouds, and IFR flying conditions. That'll extend right down through the Bering Strait into the St. Lawrence Island areas. But the Aleutians, not too bad, a little breezy, but nothing too strong. Dry conditions. And then for tomorrow, that low tracks eastward, and looks like gale, possible storm force winds around that main center there over the western Bering, kind of the northwest Bering Sea area, with rain will pass across the Pribilof Islands and begin to approach the southwest coast during the late part of the afternoon. Otherwise, that low center in the Gulf of Alaska and that front really having a hard time moving eastward, but should shove some light rain down the central coastline to maybe the northwest coast of Prince of Wales Island. Otherwise, to the east and south, it stays dry, but definitely an increase in the clouds, cooler temperatures, and a little bit better chance of rain over the northern inside water areas from Juneau on up into Haines, Skagway area. And again, still some areas of light rain along the North Gulf Coast, showers and light rain south central Alaska, up into the Tanana Valley, Copper River Basin there, and just north of the eastern Alaska Range, basically dry, just isolated showers. And then risk of rain and snow showers up along the central Arctic coast into the North Slope. And then on Thursday, the Bering Sea storm there tracks across St. Lawrence Island, begins to weaken. That'll bring wind and rain into the Yukon Delta and the Seward Peninsula Norton Sound area, with lighter amounts both in the wind and rain category down to the south, but still could see some moderate rain into Kodiak Island. Rain spreads across the Kuskokwim Valley into western Cook Inlet during the afternoon. Low pressure off the southeast coast keeps it pretty unsettled there. Some periods of light rain now all the way down to Dixon Entrance, with rain or showers tapering off as you head north. Just scattered showers along the eastern North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound. Basically dry over the eastern interior. Could be a few sunbreaks there as well. And dry for the north slope out to the Arctic coast, with low clouds and fog over the Arctic Ocean. And then out to the west, a really intense storm tracks up to just south of Chimay-Attu. So look for gale and storm force winds, mostly storm force winds in the forecast out over the central and western Aleutians, 50 to 55 knots, with good gales into the eastern Aleutians on Alaska and Mac Island in the afternoon, anywhere from 40 to 45 knots, with moderate to heavy rainfall to accompany the pretty heavy winds, but a break over the Pribilof Islands. And now moving on to the track of that storm. On Thursday morning, it's going to be still south of the Aleutians, but by Friday morning, it looks like it's going to track due northeast and actually deepen further as it crosses after it gets by the Aleutians. And it should track west of the coast, west of the west coast. Today, it looks like it may track more toward the Bering Strait coast. Depends on which model you look at. There's pretty much uncertainty after Friday morning exactly where that low center will track. You can see one model puts it up right over the Kobuk Valley Saturday morning. Like I said, another model puts it into the Chukchi Sea Saturday morning. So some uncertainty, but still a big storm, a lot of wind, possible hurricane force winds into the Aleutians and Pribilofs with that, and possible coastal flood warning along the southwest coast as well, and high surf. And now for the lows, 40s to lower 50s for the Panhandle, upper 30s in the Copper River Basin. Otherwise, 40s for the remainder of the state, south central Alaska, Kodiak Island, Kuskokwim Valley. Highs in the 50s tomorrow everywhere except the southern Panhandle, always into the mid-60s there with a string of nice days once again. And then the lows the following morning down near the frost point for the Copper River Basin, otherwise 40s. And 40s now for the Panhandle as well, even Kodiak Island. Highs back into the 50s, some mid to upper 50s, possibly pushing 60 around AKwx to Sit in the Valley and the Homer area, as well as Kodiak. A little cooler in the southern Panhandle, upper 50s to lower 60s. And for the lows up north, in the 30s north of the Brooks Range, or from the Brooks Range on north, 40s to the south, a few upper 30s in the higher valleys, and then highs upper 30s to mid 40s for the North Slope and Arctic coast. Into the Brooks Range, 40s, and then 50s south of the Brooks Range, upper 40s over the Bering Strait, lows in the 30s and 40s, followed by highs once again, mostly in the 50s, and then 40s along the Arctic coast and into the Bering Strait. Lows tonight in the 40s for the Bering Sea and the Alaska Peninsula Aleutians. Highs tomorrow, lower 50s, tad warmer there for the central Aleutians, mid-50s Alaska Peninsula. And for Thursday morning, lows mid-40s for St. Lawrence Island, mid to upper 40s for the southwest coast, near 50 for the Alaska Peninsula, and 48 to 51 for the Aleutians, mid-40s for the Pribilofs, followed by highs again near 60 for Adak and Atka, mid to upper 50s for the Alaska Peninsula, lower 50s for the Pribilofs, upper 40s St. Lawrence Island.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to flying weather. Some IFR up there over the western Arctic coast, as well as the central coast and western North Slope down across the Noatak Valley and the northwest coast. Narrow band of IFR, St. Lawrence Island, down along Yukon Delta coastline, Nunivak Island, and from Cape Newenham right across all of Bristol Bay up into the Kuskokwim Valley, and really everywhere along and south of the Yukon River Valley there, all the way down, covering the Gulf of Alaska, Kodiak into the northern Panhandle, areas of IFR and marginal VFR for the Bering Sea. And then for the afternoon, next system pushing IFR back into Nunivak Island with the warm front IFR across the Alaska Peninsula, cold front IFR from Adak westward, marginal VFR in between, and marginal VFR pushing in across Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta are becoming marginal for Bristol Bay and the Seward Peninsula. Areas of IFR and areas of VFR over the interior there, with mostly IFR for the North Gulf Coast, Resurrection Bay into probably Passage Canal westward to Portage, and marginal for Yakutat. Some IFR now, North Coast, Northern Panhandle. And for the Thursday morning time frame, IFR back into the southwest interior, Bristol Bay, approaching Kodiak Island, otherwise marginal there, right up into Cook Inlet, Mananuska-Susitna Valley. Prince William Sound, marginal. Kuskokwim Valley, increasing IFR to the south and southwest. Aleutians IFR, some IFR on the Arctic coast, otherwise VFR up over the northern interior. Eastern interior, pretty good area of IFR from the eastern Brooks Range down into the Tanana Valley, across Copper River Basin. And for the afternoon, Thursday, solid IFR from Yakutat down across all the Panhandle, and IFR pushing in with the system into Cook Inlet, Kenai Peninsula, eventually the Susitna Valley, extending down across the Kodiak Island, Alaska Peninsula, southern Bering Sea, and all the Aleutians becoming VFR for the Pribilofs into the Kuskokwim Delta, and IFR, northern Bering Sea, right up through the Strait and the western Arctic coast. VFR, eastern interior, including the Copper River Basin. Passes, Anatuvik, occasionally marginal tomorrow, occasional marginal VFR for Adigan as well. Lake Clark and Merrill, starting out marginal or kind of bouncing between marginal VFR and VFR, with the best chance of VFR in the afternoon. Rainy, IFR, trending toward marginal VFR. And windy, looks IFR at times for the day Wednesday. Isabel, marginal VFR with IFR possible on the southern approach. Mentasta, occasionally marginal, which means VFR at other times. And Tanita, same thing, occasional marginal VFR, possible VFR as well. And for Portage, looks to be IFR, especially on the eastern entrance. Chilkoot and White, IFR. Freezing levels, 4,000 feet over the eastern Bering Sea, and about 6,000 feet there over the Yukon Flats and down almost to the eastern Alaska Range there. Otherwise, the Panhandle, 6,000 to 10,000 feet across there, warmest course in the south, and 4,000 to 10,000 feet out over the Bering Sea with that 10,000 foot line north of Adak, Atka, and Shimia. And several surges of moisture. First one there above about 5,000 feet. isolated moderate mostly. It could be some areas of considerable moderate along the panhandle as that slides eastward slowly, as well as up over the Yukon Flats. And next one there, areas of isolated moderate approaching the southwest coast, extending down to the Alaska Peninsula. And then more icing coming in, but with the warm air out there, it's going to be above 11,000 feet over the western Aleutians. And for the jet stream, we've got pretty good flow across the western Bering up to 115 knots, dives southeastward to 110 knots south of Kodiak Island, some northwesterlies at 75 over the Yukon Delta, south to north flow 85 to 95 knots across the north coast of the Panhandle. And at 9,000 feet, westerlies 55 to 65 knots there for the Bering Sea, eastern Aleutians to about Atka, light over the interior, and south to southwest 40 knots across the Panhandle. 3,000 feet, just a narrow band of a little bit stronger winds, say about 20 to 25 knots there across the Panhandle. Easterlies 40 knots off the eastern Arctic coast, and 40 to 65 knot winds there over the Bering Sea blowing around that pretty intense low center. And as far as turbulence goes, considerable moderate chop, Alaska Peninsula to Atka Island, St. Lawrence Island. And after the break, I'll be back with the marine forecast.
So the sun, looking here from the ground, seems very constant and quiet. But actually, when we look at it from space, we can see it's quite turbulent and active. Space weather is activity on the sun and in the near-Earth space that can affect our technological infrastructure and society. The sun is constantly spewing out a stream of particles called the solar wind that goes out into the solar system. And it affects us here near Earth, where we're protected by a magnetic field. The interaction between the solar wind and the magnetic field can cause space weather. The Carrington event is the largest storm we've seen in recorded history when we're looking at space weather. But every solar cycle, which repeats about every 11 years, one estimate estimates that there's a 10% chance of getting a large storm like the Carrington event that could impact us here on Earth. But we see solar storms almost all the time. And these storms have an effect on our technological infrastructure. Solar storms can cause activity in Earth's atmosphere and magnetosphere that can damage electrical power grids that power our communities, interrupt radio and satellite communications, and can cause our GPS navigation to fail. NOAA is working with its international partners to ensure that we have different vantage points where we can observe space weather. Our space weather observing infrastructure from space includes the NOAA Discover satellite and the NASA ACE satellite that are stationed upstream of Earth to give us a first buoy measurement of the solar wind. It also includes the ESA-NASA SOHO satellite and the NASA Stereo satellite that image the sun and also make coronagraph measurements of the outer atmosphere of the sun, the corona, that can tell us when large explosions happen off the sun. We also observe the sun and the Earth's magnetic field from the geostationary location with NOAA's GOES. So the way we use the space weather information from satellites and from the ground is to be able to make forecasts and predictions, just like we do with hurricanes and terrestrial weather. We observe the sun and look for activity and see how it develops, and see if it's going to culminate into a large explosion that can affect us here on Earth. NOAA is working with its international partners to expand our observing capability. We're committed to observing along the Sun-Earth line. So we're going to do the imaging of the sun and the upstream buoy measurements of the solar wind along the Sun-Earth axis. more we understand about the sun, the more we can prepare for it and become, just like we are a weather-ready nation, become a space weather-ready nation. And as we look forward to humans exploring out into the solar system and advancing our space commerce activities, space weather becomes more and more important.
Here at the Space Weather Prediction Center, we monitor space activity as it's occurring back at the sun, and then we issue out a forecast as well as alerts, watches, and warnings as activity is occurring. A typical space weather event would start with a solar flare back at the sun. That solar flare is short-lived and produces fairly short-lived impacts as well, basically impacting communications on the daylit side of the Earth. However, some solar flares are also associated with a coronal mass ejection or an eruption of plasma that's blasted off the sun and out into space. As forecasters, it's our job to determine if that cloud of plasma is moving towards Earth, and if it comes towards Earth, what the potential impacts may be. Those impacts can range from a fairly low-level storm that may produce the aurora a little bit farther south than usual, or can range up into fairly significant magnetic disturbances that don't happen very often, but when they do, they can impact technologies and infrastructure here on Earth. We provide information to lots of different user groups, from airlines to the electric power grid, to emergency managers, aviation, satellite community, lots of different customers.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And today's sea ice analysis is not much different from yesterday, but everything's still in a melting mode and expected to stay that way for the next few days. So moving on to the coastal water forecast for the south coast, south winds 20 to 25 knots for the day Wednesday, and north coast, southwest 15 to 25 knots, seas 7 to 9 feet. And for the Lynn Canal Glacier Bay area, south at 20, south 20 with higher gusts for Stevens Passage, Clarence Strait, southeast winds 15 knots. And for Thursday, lighter winds along the coast, west 15 knots on the south coast, and west to southeast at 10 knots for the north coast. Otherwise, northern inside waters, south 15 knots, and central and southern inner channels and waters looking at light south winds at 10 knots. Prince William Sound, east winds 10 knots, 2-foot seas for Wednesday. Light variable winds for the North Gulf Coast and Barren Islands, with seas running 4 to 5 feet. West winds 15 knots for Kamishak Bay, and south to southwest winds 10 to 15 knots for Cook Inlet. And then moving on to Thursday, southeast winds 20 knots for Prince William Sound, and southeast 20 knots with 6-foot seas for the North Gulf Coast. Otherwise, south winds 20 knots for the Barren Islands and Kamishak Bay with 6 to 7-foot seas there. Southern Cook Inlet also looking at a south wind at 20 knots. And northern Cook Inlet a little lighter there, 15 knots, still from the south. And for Kodiak Island, small craft advisories for Wednesday, west winds 25 knots. Alaska Peninsula, west-southwest winds 20 to 25 knots. And Bristol Bay, west winds 25 knots, seas just under 10 feet. Those will swing around to the southwest for Bristol Bay on Thursday. So another 2 days, small craft advisory level winds coming up there with 7-foot seas. And the Alaska Peninsula, southwest winds 30 knots with 9 to 11-foot seas. Kodiak Island, southwest winds 20 to 25 knots. For the eastern Aleutians on Wednesday, southwest winds 25 knots, 7 to 9-foot seas. Small craft advisories for the central Aleutians. Winds will be southwest 25 to 30 knots. And for the western Aleutians, west-southwest winds 25 to 30 knots. And for Thursday, that big storm coming in toward Adak Island, or toward Kiska Island, actually. So the western Aleutians, storm warnings, northeast winds 50 knots, seas building to 38 feet. and southwest winds 55 knots for the western Aleutians. Storm warnings also for the central areas there. South to southwest winds 50 to 55 knots. And for the eastern Aleutians, good gales in there with south to southwest winds 40 to 45 knots. Seas running 16 to 23 feet. And for the southwest coast, variable winds 25 knots for the Yukon Delta coast, southeast at 20 for St. Lawrence Island. South 40 knot gales increasing throughout the day to 40 knots for St. Matthew Island, and the Pribilof southwest at 30 knots. For Thursday, for the St. Lawrence Island area, small craft advisories, east winds 30 knots, gale warnings for St. Matthew Island, west winds 35 knots, small craft advisories for the Pribilofs and the Kuskokwim Delta coast. Actually, the entire southwest coast and Pribilofs will be looking at a southwest wind at 30 knots. And up along the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, east winds 30 knots, central and western Arctic coast, east winds at 25 knots, dropping off to about 15 knots coming around the Cape Lisburne Point Hope area. Then they turn northeast only at 10 knots on down to Wales. Wales to Cape Thompson on Thursday, east winds at 20 knots. And then small craft advisories for the remainder of the Arctic coast for east winds 25 knots, seas right around 8 feet. For tonight, light precipitation continues along areas of the Arctic coast and North Slope. Brooks Range down to about the Yukon River there, pretty dry. Some areas of rain and showers with that 1,001 millibar low in the eastern interior. And rain really has a tough time making any farther south in the panhandle of that stationary front that's continuing to weaken. And rainfall rates will diminish along the eastern North Gulf Coast. Next system out west brings gales and storms mostly out over the western and northwest Bering Sea tomorrow with rain into the Pribilofs. It stays wet for the North Gulf Coast, northern panhandle, areas of rain and showers over the interior. And for the day on Thursday, unsettled with a weakening low right off the southeast coast, basically dry with isolated showers, maybe some clearing over the eastern interior. Rain pushes eastward, big storm rolls into the western Aleutians with storm and possible hurricane force winds thereafter.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.